Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast. This week, I was meant to be going live with the episode that is, I promise, coming to you very, very soon. Sonia and I are in different time zones, and there's actually 14 hours apart. So there's been a couple of errors with our bookings, etc. And the universe works in mysterious ways. So potentially this was a nudge to deliver you this episode this week. And I'm super excited for the one with Sonia to go live. So don't worry, it is still in the making. It will be recorded. Now, what I then decided was to bring you next week's episode this week, because it is truly very important to me to bring episodes to you every single week. And that has been a mission from the start. And we're not that far away from 2 years of the Beyond Condition podcast. So thank you to everyone that tunes in, because it really does mean the world to me. And this episode is something that I've toyed with for a while, which is an undercurrent of most of my solo episodes, because the solo ones, I tend to delve into topics or thoughts, feelings, experiences that are personal to me. And that comes with trust from you, my audience. And without you, I wouldn't have a podcast. So when I delve into different topics that are maybe a bit controversial or things that aren't talked about, it's always quite a strong thought process for some time before I actually record and then release. Because I always want to bring episodes that are enjoyable to listen to, that you can learn something from, and like I say, bring experiences to the podcast, and always knowing that we are human. We all have different upbringings. We all have different experiences in life. And I ask that you listen to this episode with an open mind. And I'm going to remind you of that at the end of the podcast. This is certainly a controversial one. And what I sort of went through in my mind and thought about heavily was, how would this be received? Because recreational drugs have a different opinion from everyone. Throughout my life, I've been through many, many different routes around this. And what I'm going to talk about today is actually I'd like to call it the spiritual awakenings that I've had through using recreational drugs, what I've learned about myself, what skills actually I find that I've taken into the rest of my life through using, I guess we could call this enhancement drugs as well. So we've got PEDs that are used in bodybuilding that are performance enhancing drugs. Then we've got recreational drugs. And I'm also going to share with you sort of my protocols around use. What are the things that I would recommend that you consider before, or if you already try recreational drugs, things that you could go, oh, okay, that makes a little bit more sense. Now, this episode was almost solidified when I did the one with Jeff, and we spoke about microdosing, macrodosing, in particular psychedelics. If I go right back to the start, and it's something I've mentioned on my personal podcast before, when I used to smoke weed. Now, that was when I was a lot younger, and it was almost, I would say, like a phase. Everyone around me was smoking a lot of weed. Everyone was doing it. So it was like, well, it makes sense for me to do that. But it actually got to a point where I can safely say that I was reliant on smoking weed. And that was quite a scary spot to be in. But it's never really held me back from then exploring other drugs as I've got older. With the smoking weed, it was when I was around the time when I was homeless. It was around the time where I was trying to figure out really who I was. Because it's not till later years in life that actually I now realize who I am, what my passions are in life, where I want my life to head. And we can see that from, of course, now being in Thailand and starting a new chapter with Matt. There's been a lot of manifestations and actions that have had to go on to get us here today. And when I talk about the reliance of weed, it truly did get to the point where I couldn't leave the house without smoking even a toke of a joint. When I look back, I feel that addiction was there. It was crazy because I just couldn't see life without that. I felt like I couldn't function without having, like I say, a toke of a joint. And one of my most prevalent memories of that is the times when I used to go to college and I genuinely root around the bedroom. We were living with my first partner's mum, and I would search under the sofas, I would look in the ashtrays, I would be looking everywhere for either a bit of a joint or some weed so I could make one. And I didn't feel like I could literally go out the house without that. But then what was a strange reflection for me was that actually I'd then go to college or work and I'd spend 8-10 hours out the house. And yes, I'd be thinking about, I want to get home and smoke a joint, but I wouldn't necessarily decline cognitively or get those, like, I guess, signs of withdrawal or needing a fix per se. And I was always motivated to keep working and keep my education there. That was so, so important to me. And that's always been there for me. Consequently, that also leads into being really, really passionate about spreading my message without people then seeing me in a different light to go, well, you're using drugs. What are you doing? And the bad things that comes from how people associate you using any type of drug. What I will mention here is that after this period, when I went into drinking a lot of alcohol, is that alcohol is legalized and it's something that many, many people do. It's a crutch at times. It's something that people get into the habit of doing, you know, a lot of nights in the week, at the weekends, however that pans out. And a lot of people that I work with or come across say, I can't wait till Friday to have a drink to be able to switch off. So because that's legalized, why is that any different from if someone wants to use recreational drugs for a similar outcome? Because actually it's been, put out on the media, put out in people's minds that don't use recreational drugs, that it's a bad thing to do. However, when you actually use them and there's thought and intention behind it, it's a very, very different experience, and it's a pretty life-changing experience. And when I talk about the reliance on smoking weed, I would never, ever, of course, promote going down the route of relying on anything, whether that's alcohol, drugs, other things that are deemed as healthy. So whether we go to the gym, eat right, whatever that is, all of these things can have negative consequences if we go balls to the wall and become obsessive, compulsive, whatever terms you want to use there, because you can still get addicted to good things and that then can have negative consequences. And what I certainly learned from the time as a younger person, this was the ages of 14, 15, 16, where I did smoke weed, was that it was not a nice spot to be in. It felt really tough because not being able to function without having something is crazy. And this, as I've moved into bodybuilding, this became the same association with the gym, with having everything set, with having routine, because it became obsessive. And I realized I have this obsessive type nature to me. It's a personality trait I have. But what I've learned over the years is that I'm able to funnel it. I'm able to recognize it myself, so that when I do try something new, or I am bodybuilding, I can go, okay, so this is my personality. I maybe need to put things in place so that I can throw myself out of routine sometimes, or try different things. When you do become obsessive over something, it takes over your life. And whether you realize that or not is a different thing. But when you do realize and you come away from something, like when I came away from smoking weed, I look back and I thought, Christ, that was a dark time, because I wasn't able to function without that in my life. So being at that young age, that was, of course, another thing that wasn't ideal. It was during my time when I'd be at school. It was during my time when I then went on to college, that first bit of college. And the effects that I had from this use, I used to get a lot of paranoia, which, moving in social circles and being around people does not lend itself well. I remember times before I was homeless, when I first started smoking weed, I'd walk home from my ex-boyfriend's house and it would be getting dark, and I'd hear voices and I'd hear rustles in the bushes. And, bearing in mind, I'm like 14 years old and I'm on my way home thinking, shit, is someone following me? And my head is feeling like it's going to blow up almost, because I'm so scared. And it's like, do I need to run? Do I need to escape? What am I going to do? And I'm living on edge all the time. I'd get home, my mum would question me, my stepdad would question me. There were times where my stepdad would open my eyes and go, have you been smoking weed? Are you stoned? And I'd be like, no, I'm fine. And generally during the day, when you were smoking with other people and it was fun, because of course it does facilitate a lot of laughter if you smoked weed. And the famous sort of time when people do it is when they go off to Amsterdam, or they go to places to smoke weed, and it's funny. And there's that association of getting the munchies, going out, walking, laughing, having fun, all silly things that we maybe wouldn't do in life. And that is what tends to gravitate people towards anything like this, because of course you're brought into an easier way of life where there's less thinking around the pressures of life. And that's another reason why I feel like I continue to explore this route, but with different substances, because there is a lot of pressure and stress in life. Let's face it, that's how life is, particularly as the years have gone on, through social media, through putting yourself out there. You're going to get opinions, you're going to have pressure. Even if you watch the news, it can set up your day to have a pretty negative day, because you think, God, there's so much shit going on in the world. And the escapism of using recreational drugs is massive. For me, certainly, it's something that I genuinely look forward to. And when I sort of started to transition away from smoking weed, and I knew that I needed to do that because I was addicted, I was reliant, I knew that that was only going to go one way. I then got introduced to using cocaine. The first time I used cocaine, again, another social pressured scenario, it was my decision to do it. There's no way I'd ever say that people have made me do things. But I was like, I don't really know what to do here. Everyone else is doing it. I'm young. I think I was around 16, maybe. And it was so funny because I didn't know what the hell to do. So, of course, snorting it up your nose is the root of using cocaine. And I remember saying to my friend there, I was like, can you show me how to do it? But then no one can look at me while I do it. And for me, cocaine isn't really a drug that I like. It didn't make me feel that good. It made me feel pretty crummy. But everyone was doing it, and it was like, okay, so we smoke weed, we do some coke, this is how it is. And before the time where I delved into alcohol more, that wasn't really ever a thing. We'd like meet up, smoke, maybe have some food, and then once that's digested, going later into the night, we'd do some cocaine. But I soon realized that wasn't the drug for me. It just, like I say, didn't make me feel good. I felt very heavy in the head, lethargic, like spaced out. And what I find is that with cocaine, that you need to keep taking a hit every sort of 30 minutes, because the high that you can get, which I did experience at times, you get that lift and you're like, oh, I feel pretty busy, I feel pretty good. And then you get that, energy coming down. And then it's like, I need another hit. So consequently, all night, it's like every half an hour, let's go and do a line, let's go and do a line. And not only that, it's very expensive. And you get, your nose feels like it's burning sometimes. The next day you wake up with your nose bleeding. It's just not a good thing, I find, for me. Again, I'd never have cast opinions or have opinions on other people that want to use cocaine, but I wouldn't say that it's as prevalent in the bodybuilding world as some of the other recreational drugs I'm going to talk about today. So going through that time, I was exploring. And I think that sometimes people in life maybe don't want to explore things because in the back of their mind, they might know, okay, so I could like this and then I might want more, which can be quite a scary thought. And addictions, this type of personality, you can easily go from one thing to another, which I've already demonstrated there. It's not something that's, controlled per se, because you finish one thing and then you're looking for your next obsessive behavior. Now, this then went into using speed, but that was for initially because me and my friends at work got on to doing speed diets. Now, this will be a little bit more interesting for bodybuilders because you may know people that use this, you may not. But I actually started using speed to lose weight because it suppresses your appetite. And this in itself was a slippery slope because I didn't know anything about nutrition. I didn't exercise. I was working in a pub, so I was working long, late shifts. And the energy rush that you get from speed and the suppression of appetite, you're literally buzzing around like an absolute lunatic. But it feels good because you're busy, you're getting involved with everything, you feel confident. It's like da 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 da, and it's some crazy, crazy feelings that you get, but you feel on top of the world, and it's very, very cheap. So even though I was on little to no money during that time with paying rent, etc., and being young, being at college, it was so cheap that I was able to do it. And that then, using cocaine was normally if friends gave it to me because it is so expensive. Whereas the speed, it was like, oh, I can get into this. And it was something that was like an era of the time I worked at the pub. A lot of people were using it and it was pretty normal. And during my time working in the pub, there was a lot of pressure around being skinny, around body image and how we looked. I was there from a young age, but this spanned into sort of my early 20s. I left there, I think I was 21. So this was a time, certainly for myself, where I was exploring, going out clubbing, meeting boys, this type of thing. And to lose weight was a positive thing. So speed diets, like I say, suppress your appetite and you just don't want to eat. And when I say you don't want to eat, you genuinely do not want to eat. You can't even think about food or face food. So there was a group of us, and when it got suggested, I was a bit like, oh God, I don't know. But then the pros of it being losing weight, not wanting food. Again, I didn't have much money at that time. And it may seem a little bit like, oh, well, what do you mean you didn't want food? That's fuel for your body. But during this time, when I didn't have any money, the thought of not needing to spend money on food was certainly an attractive thing because I didn't have much to live on. So I explored it. I decided, okay, so I'll get in with the crowd once again. And this definitely is a pattern of my life of trying to fit in with other people and pursuing things that other people do. This is something that I talk about on my social media and I talk about with clients and other people, is because I've learned, not the hard way, but I've learned through experience, that it never really lends itself well when you just try and follow the crowd rather than being your authentic self. However, these experiences have led me to being my authentic self. So I'm actually grateful that I've had these times during my life, because I wouldn't be where I am today. And this also is another, I guess, quite a cool thing to this episode, because I'm actually giving you personal anecdote of different things that I've done and the experiences I've had. And the speed diet and what I was doing there, it didn't last that long, because for me, the side effects, they're pretty fucked up. And I didn't feel good after this period of time. And with, like most drugs, if you take too much, or what would be perceived as a sensible dose per se, the negative impact can be pretty monumental, because it is mind altering. Your brain has a shift, whatever you're using. So there's those thoughts around, if you're getting side effects from anything, is that worth what it brings to your life? A bit like, alcohol. How you feel the next day is pretty shit for most people, but it's something that we might do at a weekend and then still do it the following weekend, because we forget those side effects. Whereas with the speed, you cannot forget. You are wired, you feel so hyped all the time, and that then leads to you not sleeping a lot of the time. Certainly for me, I would spend nights and nights and nights just laying in my bed, looking at the ceiling. I couldn't even close my eyes. I was so wired, and that was not nice. So this just lasted for a short period of time, and I was able to come away from that. Now, a pivotal point that took me to where this podcast is more based on, because this is really what I want to get into, the positive effects that I've had from using psychedelics. For me, I have had so many good experiences from recreational drugs that we class as sort of psychedelics, that it's something that's very, very cathartic to share. And I do think that really, there is more talk, there's more open information around the use of psychedelics, but certainly it still can be quite a taboo subject. And my first experience is where I'm going to start this section, because honestly, it was like a spiritual awakening. It was crazy. And the documentaries that I've watched, talking with Jeff, all of these things, talking with other people, it's a very similar thought process. It takes you into a different mindset and a different way of thinking that is away from normal life. So that escapism I've spoken about, that change in how you feel, is certainly amplified when you do try this route. And the first time I tried what you'd probably class as a psychedelic, I guess, is when I was out clubbing and I'd been drinking, and one of my friends said, try this. And if I'm honest, I didn't really know what it was. And it was actually MDMA. And about 30 to 45 minutes later, and you never forget your first time, right? Because it is so life-changing. I was like, holy fuck. Everyone in this room, everyone I come into contact with tonight, I love. I cannot see any badness right now. I am so lifted. I am so happy. And all of the pressures of life outside of this moment melted away, quite literally. You cannot compare what it feels like. Taking MDMA is something that I do love to do as a mechanism of being able to just completely switch off. And I say pressures of life. Now, for me personally, I've got to a point in my life where I no longer feel pressure per se each and every day. of course, we all have work commitments, we have things that go on in life, but I wouldn't say I'm a pressurized person, a stressed person. So it's certainly not that escapism that it once was way back when. But I have continued use of MDMA as a macro dose 2 or 3 times a year. And I genuinely look forward to this time because it's normally with good friends. It's normally at an event, or Matt and I will sometimes do home sessions. And it's something I do look forward to. I absolutely love it because I immerse and switch off. And this is where I always try and say, listen to information like this with an open mind. The trauma that I've dealt with in my life, the life experiences that I've had are pretty fucked up. And if I think about them logically, or when I've spoken about them on the pod, if I was to list everything that had happened in my life, today I could be in a fucking hole. I could be a very, very unhappy person. I could be at rock bottom. But I would say, and it was highlighted more when I spoke to Jeff about this, that actually perhaps my ethos in life, perhaps the way I view things that come up that are of a stressful nature, could have been complemented by the use of psychedelic drugs. And the more and more I'm looking into it, the more and more documentaries I'm listening to, and what actually happens to your brain and the serotonin dump that you get from using MDMA, that feel good factor, the experiences you have, that actually perhaps having those times throughout a year, like I say, 2 or 3 times a year, maybe having that there for me is a very functional thing. And I spoke about at the start, giving my sort of protocols and guidelines around use. And I think that's an important thing and message to get across, because when you go into a trip or you're going to use class A's, it's very much reliant on your intention. And I truly believe that. If you go into this thinking, I want to get absolutely fucked up and off my tits, then you're probably going to get fucked up and off your tits, and potentially that could lead into all different types of experiences. However, for me, I always go into a trip thinking what I want to get from this experience. And this is certainly relevant for the use of all drugs and even alcohol, because really that is still a drug and there still is effect from that. If you're in a bad spot and you go into a trip, it's going to amplify 9 times out of 10, and it's going to feel even worse. You're going to really zone in on that rough patch you're going through. So consequently, before I go into using something like MDMA, I'm like, okay, so this is set up on this day. This is the day I'm going to do it. And what do I want to get from this trip? Now, it's always the same. I want to have a good experience. I also want to have some escapism, not because life is stressful, but to just come away from the day-to-day thinkings, the things that can sometimes get on top of you. Because every day we all have things we need to do, we all need to commit to. So it's, I've got to do X, Y, Z. I've got a list of tasks. It's this into this into this. And that can become pretty draining. That can lead to a lack of purpose, a lack of self-worth, because particularly if you're working for someone else, you're maybe a parent, you're maybe married, all of those commitments we have in life, you can lose yourself a bit. Whereas what I find is when I go into these experiences, I hit the reset button and I end up feeling very different after an experience. I have reflective thoughts and then I feel good. I feel grateful to be able to experience something like MDMA in a very, very good way. And something I actually listened to on one of the documentaries was, why are drugs on this earth? Why have they been formulated if they're not there to use? And that's quite an interesting thought process. Because yes, like I've already spoken about, you can use drugs and become addicted to them, and that can lead to a very scary path. However, if there's use around drugs and it's in a more controlled manner and you get something very positive from it, who is in a position where they can take that from you? Who should take that from you? Because actually, if you gain so much from these experiences, then I truly believe that actually that leads me to being able to have more of a handle on my mental health, for me to be able to tolerate more in life. I genuinely feel that. And actually, when you look at it, when you look at studies, particularly around the different way you can dose, so like microdosing, the productivity that can come from that, how people actually use that to work in a more condensed way, how people use that for creativity, it makes sense that they are there to use for positives as well as what the world might see as a negative. And this first experience I had was so epic. It was like, whoa, for the first time, I'm in love with myself. I'm so happy. I'm fulfilled. Like I say, I looked around and I thought, I love all of these people around me. And it was quite something. And because I didn't really know what it was, and then I asked questions and I found out, I was like, when do I get to experience that again? Naturally, there's a thought process behind this. It's not something you can just say, oh, have you got any MDMA, mate? Generally, you're going to need to source drugs that are a recreational nature. Again, this is another reason why it leads to it being quite taboo, right? Because if it was available, I can pretty much hand on heart say that a lot more people would do more, experience more. The caveat to that is it can be quite a good thing in a sense of, if it's not as available, potentially people aren't going to get as addicted and use it as much. And then maybe like my use, you get more of a sense of, when I do use it, when I can get some, it's going to be based on experience. It's going to be based on a really nice time with friends, or like I say, with Matt. And it's actually more of a constructive thing rather than being able to pop down the shop and get some. So there's pros and cons to that, I would say. And particularly through my addictive nature, there was always that, okay, so like I say, when can I get that experience again? But what I would say is, when we look to things like mushrooms, MDMA, all of these substances, it's not something generally you'd want to do every day. Now, when you microdose, there's more merit in people that may use that more frequently, because like I say, it aids productivity, creativity, and you can function very well when you're microdosing. You actually feel pretty good, you feel more switched on. But where does that then lead if that's the only time you can find creativity? So there is pros and cons to all of this. And what I then found was I was excited to try it again. And then this was around a time, I don't know if any of you would have experienced Slinkies in Bournemouth, if you're from around my area, or you would have traveled there. But this was like I think it was like 24-hour club, and you'd buy tickets and get a bus with a load of other people, and you'd all go there. Now, when you go to a rave that's of a long period, it's highly likely that there is use of class A's, right? It's pretty hard to stay awake on just alcohol or nothing when you're there for 12 to 14 hours. The music points towards it as well. Being able to dance, be upbeat, all of that for that length of time, it's full on. So most people are going to be using some sort of recreational drug. And this was my first experience of like a proper full-on rave type setup. And it was cool. Like, we got picked up, everyone's excited. We've got some MDMA, there was some pills, and it was a great night. We were so happy, full of love, all of that experience that I'd had from that first time. And this then went on to various raves where I started getting on the rave scene. And during this time, I also had a trip to Amsterdam. It's the first and only time I've been there. And that's, of course, well known for weed and mushrooms. And I touched on my experience of microdosing with mushrooms when I spoke with Jeff. But when I went to Amsterdam, I'm sure there's going to be people that listen that have done the rookie era of the shop attendant telling you to do a little bit and then you eat them all. Very similar to like a hash brownie. So you take a bit, tastes nice, you eat the whole thing, and then you're absolutely fucked. Now, I, through this experience, was able to see what a bad trip looks like. For me and my 3 friends, we all had a really good trip on the mushrooms. My brother, however, was in a pretty bad spot, and his trip was next level. It was scary as fuck. There was so many times throughout that trip that it was like, I just want this to be over for him. And it was actually quite hard to pull back and stay in my own lane, as it were, and not go into a bad trip myself, which is something that can happen. So if you see and experience something happening to someone in your friendship circle and they have a bad trip, if you focus too much on it, that can end up sending you into a bad trip. So I'd always recommend that if this happens, that you try and just remember that you're okay and that you're not in that bad spot to then take that onus from the person that is having a bad trip. And what I would say is, with bad trips, there of course is circumstances where people die, where people end up in hospital for using class A's and abusing them. And that's why another reason, when I talk about this on the podcast and when I talk about this to people, it's never me saying, well, if you haven't done them, you should do them, because it definitely is not. But this podcast is about sharing life experiences. And for me, it's been a very positive impact on my life. I certainly think from seeing this bad trip early on that I was able to see what the effects of taking too much or going into a trip in a bad spot, what that can do. My brother was jumping on the bed. He could see a crocodile on the floor. He was freaking the fuck out. He laid on the bed and his arms and legs turned into pencils. And he was just laying there like, fuck, my arms are pencils, my legs are pencils. And I was like, I can't see the pencils. And he was like, I can't move them. And I was like, what the hell's going on? And I laugh about it now, but it was pretty intense. And then they told us in the mushroom shop, if you have a bad time, take on some sugar. So we were sitting there in the end, we got in bed, laid there next to each other, holding hands, eating sweets, and we were drinking orange juice, thinking we need this to be over for my brother to get out of this okay. And we got through it okay. But it was quite a experience. And like I say, I feel like I learned valuable lessons there as to my own use. But it didn't scare me to not take them again, because I'd had such good experiences with the psychedelic route. And over the years, I've always done 2 or 3 raves a year, been to things like Creamfields, Global Gathering with friends, and it's always been fucking epic. Something I also learned is something that I would like to share, that when people talk about a come down, so the days that are after a rave or an experience or a trip, however we want to frame it, is that actually this can be a time where you reflect on how enjoyable it was, how much you took from the experience, how much you found that love for friends, and how you felt during your time. Because actually, if you have this heightened experience and it's amazing, and then all you want to do is have it again, and you feel sad that you've got to go home, part from your friends, go back to work, whatever it is, you can end up feeling very, very alone, lost, and quite sad. And of course, the serotonin release that you get from MDMA the next day comes crashing down. Hence why people sometimes supplement with 5-HTP the next day. And what I would always suggest is that the next day you have a clear day. you're able to hydrate, you're able to eat little and often, you're able to get back on track. And actually, I found over rinse and repeating my own protocol that I can train the next day if I want to, if it's not a rest day. I'm able to function pretty normal. However, I do feel a bit foggy and a little bit like, okay, this is a bit strange from that dump and that feeling of such a heightened experience the next day. Whoa, I'm back to normal life. So when this comes into terms of bodybuilding, I've always felt that actually with bodybuilding, that it's worked synergistically, particularly around microdosing, because when I was microdosing magic mushrooms, which got introduced to me during the divorce that I went through, and for a bit of relief and aiding my sleep, actually it helped me sleep. I felt very, very relaxed. I felt like I could switch off from the stresses of life, and I was able to still do my bodybuilding in a better way. When you're incredibly stressed and dealing with traumatic experiences, the physique does not like that generally, and also the mind doesn't. So things can become busy and disorientated. Some people will just sack the gym off, eat a load of shit, and that's how they go about it, and perhaps they don't bodybuild for that period of time. Whereas I've always felt that actually either a rave or particularly, like I say, the microdosing, I was very functional, I felt good, and actually it felt like a very beneficial time to get me through that period. And it was cool because it was my first exposure to what microdosing would be, and I actually used it for, like I say, sort of stress relief and being able to sleep. Whereas I know that people do microdose for that productivity vibe, and that would be placed differently in the day, and you might use different psychedelics for that. And I know Jeff mentioned LSD, which is something I haven't used, and mushrooms. So again, what intention is it? Do I want to sleep? Do I want to be productive? Something I also tie into the physique development realm is me personally. I've competed for over 10 years. I've bodybuilded for over 12 years, and I've been a bodybuilder, shall we say. And during that time, I've done a lot of preps, a lot of extreme dieting, and I have had negative effects on my own physique and my health. I've had digestive issues for pretty much the whole time, which is something I'm focusing on getting better now. Sleep, I've never really been able to have good sleep as a bodybuilder from the extreme dieting, I believe. And then even pushing up, it wasn't for a very long time. And also, I do carry inflammation very easily. It's something that does happen for me. I swell up from training, from lack of sleep, when I have my menstrual cycle, when I do get acute stressors. A lot of time I am susceptible to holding water. Now, when I use MDMA or I use mushrooms, throughout the period of time of using whatever recreational drug it is, I wee a lot. I drop off a lot of inflammation, and the next day I'm able to go to the toilet. Now, you could easily be like, nah, it's nothing to do with that. But this happens every time. And Matt and I had some conversations about this. And actually, for me, bodybuilding is so fucking important. I absolutely love this lifestyle. I can't ever see my lifestyle away from bodybuilding. Hitting protein, hitting hydration, doing steps, everything that goes into our day, I absolutely live for it. Training, all of those things. But when I go into a trip, everything drops off. And something that I want to talk about in relation to my previous episodes is the food obsessions, the food thoughts, the food always having to be at a certain time, certain target, optimizing my nutrition, all of those things. It drops off. I have a quiet mind, and I've got a busy mind in respect of I eat meal one. then it's like, right, okay, so do we do steps now? No, we're going to train. Da, 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 da. You need to do work, all of these things. It's a constant. And for me, relaxing, recovering, and sleep have always been my hardest part, beyond pushing up, which is something I'm dealing with now. But the free mind you experience is next level. And I always say that you can't think of anything negative when you're having a trip, because you're so full of love, you're so full of happiness, that it's like, I just feel at one. And certainly for me and Matt, when we have our experiences, we are so intertwined, it is next level. And we are anyway on a daily basis, as most of you will know. It's certainly a new territory for me. I've never been this way. But when we have a trip together, it's truly remarkable. The next level connection is something that I absolutely love. And it's part of wanting to do this regularly with Matt, because I absolutely love it. And another extension of this is where you're so full of love, you look in the mirror, you look at yourself, and you love yourself, you love your body. And as bodybuilders, is that something we do have troubles with? Yeah, it is. Body image is certainly something we do come across. So for me, having the relief of not, worrying about food per se, not worrying about how I look for a day, is lovely. You can touch yourself. I can feel Matt touch me, and it's euphoric. It's beyond a sexual nature. It's like you've come together as one. The feeling of touch is amplified so much. And it's what I feel we should get from touch, from that connection, that human connection. And Jeff mentioned this after his first time of using LSD. He wasn't someone that was a touchy person, but I think he said his son rested his head on his shoulder and he felt at one with that. How can you question that? How can you take that experience away from someone? And this all ties into the experiences I've watched on documentaries, the conversations I've had of people that have been healed through studies of utilizing something like MDMA, which is, I may add, in America now being trialed and studied for PTSD and marriage counseling, because you've got no ego. It takes everything away and you immerse in the person, or you're able to deal with past experiences in a very different way. And I also watched, which was very, very moving, a guy that had been in pain every single day of his life. He was riddled with pain. And the first time he tried MDMA, he didn't feel pain. And he cried and he cried and he cried. And then for days after that, he had 10 days with no pain. And this is a chronic illness from birth. There's also people that have experienced things like their wife being murdered and stabbed to death. And they, through a trip with a psychologist present in a controlled manner, they revisit that. They deal with it. They find a way to cope. They come out of the trip and they are able to move forward as functioning people. Now, let me tell you, I can relate to that. It's fucking mental. But through studies, through research, there is more coming out. Again, this is not me saying that this effect is going to be on everyone, because like with bodybuilding, everyone's an individual, right? So there's always prevalence on that, of course. So what I'd quite like to also touch on is my, in inverted commas, protocol. So when I'm getting ready for a rave, they normally start at about 2 p.m. I always have a couple of meals before. I have my protein, I have my carbohydrates, and I have some fats in the first meal. The second meal, similar to what you'd have as a post-workout, you have carbohydrates and you have your protein. And I always aim for a faster release carbohydrate source, mainly due to you want to digest your food before you have your use of recreationals. And then you can have probably 2 hours digestion periods. I hydrate and have probably 3-4 liters before I have a session. And then I feel fueled, I feel good, I'm not hungry, I'm satiated, I've got energy, I'm feeling ready, I can stick to my macros, I can stick to my bodybuilding principles, and I can go into the rave or event or wherever it's going to be. And then after, your appetite is pretty trashed, but I always lean on protein. And it's never, ever let me down. I think that if we don't think about what the intention is for the session and maybe structuring our life around it, sometimes it can be, you can push it a bit too much and ask a bit too much of your body. Whereas I find I'm used to eating 4-5 times a day. So if I then had nothing, dropped, I'd feel pretty shit after doing 40 to 50,000 steps at a rave. So if I can set myself up, have it on a rest day, have my meals before, have my hydration, supplements as normal, I then go into my rave. And I personally feel much more grounded doing that. Something that is additional to this is if you're in a fat loss phase and you're using performance enhancing drugs like Clen or Yohimbine, not using those on a day that you're going to put a psychedelic in is a wise bit of advice that I'd like to give you, because it's a conversation I had with Tom, my coach. Stimulants on stimulants on stimulants are not necessarily going to end very well. This also applies to caffeine. So there's definitely a consideration around that. And as a bodybuilder, I live by protocols. It is what it is. And so we call it the rave protocol, but it's certainly something that I like to do. And it just makes me feel so much better. You're fueled, you've stuck to your normal principles, and then you can enjoy it so much more. And I'm going to finish up with Matt's first experience, because it was very cathartic for me, and it leads into something I faced, a bit of conflict I faced when I was going through my divorce and finding my feet. And I don't like to say I was finding myself, because I don't feel like that. I already knew who I was, but I'd strayed away from that. So I was getting back on track. I was finding my feet. And the first time Matt came to a rave, he turned to me and said, I can see why you do this and why you've done this to get through the divorce, because he felt freedom. And that is what I've always felt from my use of the psychedelics. And what I get from it is the sense of freedom to be at one with myself and to be able to explore an open mind, which is what I said to you right at the start. If you're going to listen to this, listen to it with an open mind and actually see it for what it is, rather than, oh God, what's she talking about? That's bad. Maybe listen to how much relief I can gain from this and how good I feel and how structured I am around my use, and maybe let that go through your mind as to, could I be a bit more open-minded in all areas of life, not just recreational drugs? So I hope this has been an interesting one. It's very, very different, and it's felt good to talk about it. But of course, I'm going to keep an open mind as to how it's received. I hope that it's been, like I say, interesting to listen to. And if anyone wants to talk more about it, if anyone wants to say, I agree, I disagree, whatever your thoughts and feelings are, then as always, I am here. You can message me on the gram. And of course, I look forward to your feedback. Thank you again for all your support, and I will speak to you very, very soon.